and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Adrian Wright from the University of Birmingham, the Senior Admissions Tutor from the School of Chemistry, and he's going to give a very insightful lecture, talk, advice on university applications, very important this time of year, and to give some advice about writing personal statements and how to prepare for interviews. So without further ado, thank you very much, and pass over to Dr. Wright. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody, and it's a great pleasure to be able to join you this evening. So I hope in the next 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so, I hope to be able to give you an oversight of my experience of working many years now in university admissions at the University of Birmingham in the School of Chemistry there. I've obviously had a lot of experience in dealing with all of the applications that come into the University of Birmingham and the chemistry department, and more widely in the science and engineering courses as well. So I hopefully give you some of the benefit of my knowledge and experience in those areas, particularly tonight, looking at how you might be considering writing personal statements, what sort of things to put in there, what do we look for in a personal statement. And also briefly, I'll mention about preparing for interviews, depending on which course you're doing. There are obvious interviews, some are critical, things like medicine, others you might find doing interviews at Oxbridge as well. So I'll try and give you some insight into my thoughts and experiences on that. But obviously as well, I'll be around to answer any questions at the end. I think if you want to type in any questions, please don't hesitate to do so in the chat facility, and we'll go through them all at the end. Okay. So in terms of personal statements then, I think there are probably some key questions really to think about. I'm sure you may have thought of these already. Why is it important to write a good personal statement? In what sense are they used by admissions tutors and by the department you apply to? With that then, what is worth including in a personal statement? What sort of things should you cover? What things maybe shouldn't you cover in there? And it's all really around what you are getting through to the personal admissions tutor in individual departments, and being able to sell yourself and explain a bit about you. Because if you think about the whole aspect of the personal statement, you know, if you think about the UCAS form, if you've ever seen a UCAS form, you haven't filled one in yet, but obviously later on you'll be looking at them. There's lots of detail that goes in there that is predetermined. So lots of information about yourself in terms of your name, date of birth, and a bit about your school. There'll also be all your qualifications in there that you've achieved so far, the subjects you're sitting at the moment, and the predicted grades you may be getting for those. And also there'll be a little insight, obviously, from your teachers around their when they write a reference for you. But the bit that you can really control, and the bit that's you're able to sort of give some snapshot, some insight into your personality and your reasons for applying, is really in that personal statement. So it's your opportunity within that whole form to tell us a little bit about you, from you as well. No one else is explaining this. This is all about you, from you. And it does, if you think about the way that a whole overall UCAS form is looked at by admissions tutors. So obviously we will look at those predetermined academic qualifications. We will also obviously look at the school reference to explain the context of those results, and give us a good insight on the benefit of the teacher's experience of you as an individual. But if we're looking at trying to decide between applicants, then it's very important to have a good personal statement. So it is going to be important. It's often not a reason that we would reject somebody if they had a really poor personal statement. But it's certainly, if you write a good statement, it's going to be of support and aid your application as well. So it supports that. So having read other good things about you in the form, if they read a personal statement that also really comes across in a very good way, you will have every opportunity then to get the place that you wanted at university. And also you'll note that if you're on a course that has interviews, then the personal statement can be a really important part of maybe information that the academic that you speak with will use as the basis for your interview. So it's important that you write something in there that you're comfortable with, but also tells about you. And so it can be the good basis for the start of an interview. So in terms of a personal statement, I think there isn't any hard and fast rule about what is a good personal statement. What exactly should it contain? I think there's quite a lot of flexibility. I think if you look into a personal statement, what I'm looking for, and I think this is true for many admissions tutors, is Why have you chosen that subject? So I'm not looking for any fantastic, clever quote that you're going to give at the start, some quote from somebody famous or whatever it might be. I mean, I think that isn't really necessary at all. I think I'd much rather see an honest reasoning as to why you have chosen that particular subject. It doesn't have to be that eye-catching and that memorable in a way. In fact, in some ways, it's better not to be. I want to hear about you and the real you. So what's your background, and what have you the background in this particular subject you're applying to university for? So what is it about that subject area that interested you? Maybe it's interested you from an early age. Maybe you're a more recent convert to that area. Maybe you don't even do that subject currently at A-level, but it's one like engineering or other subjects where you'll be moving on from other subjects you study at A-level to study those which you can't do at A-level. So really giving us some insight into why you are interested in that particular area. I think you also need to show some understanding of the subject at degree level. So I think that's important that you do a bit of your own research as to what degree level subject might involve. Now, for chemistry, like the subject I teach and I'm admission tutors for, there's quite a good linear relationship between what you've done at GCSE, then what you did at A-level, and of course, then going on to degree level. So it's not too different. But obviously, if you're doing subjects that are a little different, maybe starting an engineering course, then you've got to have a bit of research as to what that really means. What sort of skills might I need for that? And I think it's also worth mentioning maybe that you're doing subjects that have always interested you over the last few years that will then be a reason why you've gone on to choose this particular subject then at degree level. I think you can have career aspirations. Many of our students do. It doesn't mean they'll be following those career aspirations when they go through their time at university, because often they can change. You may be not fully aware of all the things you can do, and other opportunities arise then through your studies. But some idea of career aspirations can be useful. It can help guide and give the motivation why you might be looking at this particular subject. I think also as well, you can look through, and later on in your personal statement, as we'll come to in a moment, not only about your academic side, you may be doing other activities, other pastimes, other hobbies, other sports, where you get positions of responsibility. Now, remember, the personal statement is something I want to see in you, an interest in the subject you're going to do, but also want to see evidence that you will have the skills to succeed at university. And part of that, of course, is the academic skills, the idea of knowing about the course and what it might involve. But also I want to see evidence, if you have it, and many of you do, without sometimes even without realizing it, evidence of how you would be a good student at university. Those positions of responsibility, showing that maturity that you've developed, particularly at university. You must remember as well, if you put your interests and hobbies in there, it doesn't, as we'll see a bit later on, doesn't need to be a list of interests and hobbies. But I think if those hobbies and interests give you positions of responsibility, or equally show how you've been able to balance the commitment to those interests and hobbies, and sometimes they are quite committed interest on, particularly if you're doing high-level sport, you have a lot of time dedicated to that. So fitting in your studies is really important. And if you can show me that you are able to balance all of those and still do well in your course, that's a great sign that you do well at university. Because remember, at university, you'll have lots of distractions, lots of new things to take part in and get involved in, and it can be quite distracting. So evidence that you've experienced those sort of things already in your time at school will help me be convinced that you could do the same thing at university. If you've got work experience or employment, again, I think that's a really useful thing to put down there, not just listing what it is. I think that's really secondary as to what the work experience is. People worry sometimes about getting really detailed work experience. Now, I guess if you're applying to medicine, you might well need some example of some work experience in a medical related area. But for most other courses, the work experience or employment doesn't necessarily have to be in that area that you're looking at degree study. But it might, that work experience or employment might show how you've been able to handle that need to work and the working environment and still, again, do well in your studies. So I think that's a really good insight. So in summary, you're looking really to show in this personal statement, what is your motivation to do this subject at university? Show me that you'd be committed to do that subject. And also, of course, you'd be enthusiastic about doing that subject. So the personal statement needs to show that enthusiasm. Because if you're not enthusiastic now about it, I worry that when you come to university, you're not going to be enthusiastic about it. So we need that enthusiasm, evidence that you'd be committed to it and motivated to study this subject. So with all that in mind, how would you structure it? Well, I've given some rough percentages here, but please don't feel you have to follow these at all. There isn't any set ideal number for a personal statement. But I think the first part of it, this section on why you've chosen the subject university and your understanding of the subject, probably takes up a reasonable chunk of that personal statement. So I think roughly around 40% might be a sensible sort of content, but it can vary quite marginally around that, particularly if you've got other things to say, and you might have a really good strong section there to talk about. So take a bit more time in that. I think that the second section I mentioned here sort of is the supporting information in there. So it may be the other subjects you're studying at A level and how they interest you and how they might link actually into your degree subject as well. And also if you've got anything where you've read outside and shown an interest in the subject. And I think that's particularly important. It might be the reason why you first fell for that subject and want to do it at degree level, because you saw something, you read something, you experienced something, some link to a family member or a friend that may have got it working in that area. So I think that's important there as well in that section. And then probably the smallest section, only really about a quarter of that, if that, I think is to focus on those extracurricular interests and activities or work experience or any achievements that you might have. And the skills, and particularly important here, is not so much those as a sort of list of things, it's the skills you've gained from engaging in those extracurricular interests or work experience, what you've achieved and how that's those skills you're going to be useful for you when you go and study at degree level. So I've mentioned how those extracurricular activities, you might be worried that you haven't got many, or you might think you've got loads of them. And I think you know, you don't need to make an exhaustive list. It's not a tick box that we want to see 10 of these. We certainly don't. And I think that the sorts of things you should think about carefully is employment and volunteering. What have you done? What might you've done recently or in the last few years in terms of employment, or even any volunteering as well? And particularly in those where you've had positions of responsibility, your sports and leisure interests can be important as well. I think that's very important, particularly if you're doing quite committed sports that require a lot of your time. Again, I go back to mentioning that's good evidence that you've got the time management skills to be able to control all of that and still do well in your studies. I think instruments, playing musical instruments, is great to put in there as well. There is lots of correlation, particularly in the sciences, with those that do well in science that have a musical background as well. I think there's some good studies that show there's some correlated skills in those as well. So musical instruments show a commitment to learning, particularly if you've passed exams in those subjects, in those instruments as well. There's a lot of effort gone into those, and achievement there could be quite impressive. I think anything you've had, subjects you've studied but you don't necessarily have examined, I think it's worth mentioning those. Again, looking at the key skills that they've given you rather than the subject as such. I think it's always good, although you don't want to brag too much about prizes and positions achieved. I think you want to put in the context of how that makes you a good student, rather than just saying, I can do this, I can do that. I think, and I've won this prize, I've won that prize. Let's hear about how it might influence what you might do at university and how you might be the best student you can from having achieve those particular prizes or given those positions. As I mentioned, the sort of employment and work experience can be important. It doesn't have to relate to the subject. I think just think about where you've done something. It could be fairly mundane work. Just think about, not necessarily, it's not about whether you were stacking shelves in a supermarket. It's what skills you might have got from that. There's the time management skills, there's people skills as well. All of these things would be quite important for anybody who's looking at university and how they might interact. Because at university, we're also teaching not only the academic skills, we're also looking at those transferable skills, because those are the really important things that will get you the job you want in the end. You can know all the things about your subject, but if you're not able to interact well with the people around you, potentially as a graduate managing lots of people, you need those good transferable skills. And so evidence you've picked some up already will be really strong in your case as well. So I mentioned here the sort of final aspect of this is really focused on those transferable skills. So I don't think you should be talking, a whole list of I've done this, I've done that, I've done this, I've done that. It's more about what you got out of each individual thing. And that's really important. So spend some time thinking about what you might have got out of maybe the mundane activities sometimes, that you've got something out of there that you think will be an important skill to highlight to the admissions tutor and the department you're going to join. So these transferable skills, this is really important. So just thinking about I've got a whole list of them here. It's not an exhaustive list of the sort of transferable skills that could be important. Again, as I mentioned, these are sort of things that we are trying to teach in our courses. So if you've already had some experience of that and demonstrated that you've already got some of these skills, albeit maybe on a small level, but some evidence of them, it'll be really much in your favor in your personal statement. So I think looking at independence, are you able to do things on your own? You don't have to be always told what to do. I think that's something at degree level you'll find we expect you to do, to be independent learners, to be self-motivated. We're not going to be chasing you every moment for this report to be handed in or this thing to be done. You need to have that motivation. You know, you've chosen to come to university. Let's see evidence that you can actually do that. And part of the degree qualification is a demonstration that you are independent and you can be self-motivated. And that's what employers are looking for graduates, for those particular traits. I think if you've also shown team working, and this can be from your extracurricular activities, you can certainly think of that, sporting activities, pastimes, have you worked in a team? And I think you may have not much experience of that, but if you have got any, great to emphasize it. And I think that team working can go hand in hand with communication skills and the ability to talk and work with people. This is where I think sometimes employment can be a really good, or work experience or volunteering, when you've had to coordinate something, communicate with others. We need to develop those skills at university. So if you've got some of those already, develop them. That would be great to put in there as well. I think as well, you can think about transferable skills, and you can put down something you've done where it has required you to be committed. You've shown persistence. It may be through learning a musical instrument. It may be through picking up some other skills that you've done, and you've been persistent and you've worked at it. Maybe it didn't work first time, and you've built on that and you've gone through it and delivered got to that level and achieve what you wanted to achieve. So I think that persistence, commitment shows us that, you know, in a degree level, there will be times, degree study, where you find it challenging, and you need to have the motivation to persevere and commit to it, to get through those times, because there will be times that are challenging at university. So if you've shown evidence of that, that's a great thing to show as well. I think often less easy to show is leadership. That's something you can do. Again, it might be something that's in your, if you think about what you've done in your extracurricular activities, you might have shown some leadership, albeit small. I think it's important if that can be nicely woven into your personal statement. I think that links often, that leadership, with responsibility as well. You've had to respond to do something, and you've had to communicate with others and lead others. I think that's a really important thing as well. I think lots of what I've mentioned already, particularly if you've got quite a full list of extracurricular activities, it's about time management. And that's a really important skill at university, because you will, as I say, have lots of distractions. So how do you manage your time? How do you make sure that you still do your studies whilst trying to take part in sports or other activities? And I think as well, we've got other skills you can think about. The critical thinking, if you can show evidence of that, again, that's quite challenging to do. But if you've got some examples of where you've used critical thinking, maybe you've done some courses on it, and those could be either examinable or not examinable courses. And I think as well, academic skills, if you can show some of the bases where you've gone beyond your subject and you've showed those academic skills, I think that can often be implicit sometimes in your previous exam results, showing those academic skills, but more general academic skills could be useful as well. So you may have written something, you may have submitted some report or taken part in some competition that's shown that you have enhanced academic skills. I think that'd be a really important thing to include as well. So in terms of really a sort of lists of do's and don'ts, I think when you're trying to think about what to put down in your personal statement, it can be quite daunting when you're starting from the blank piece of paper. It always is. But I think try to create a list of ideas before you start, and try to flesh out those ideas, thinking about, you know, what have I done in extracurricular activities? What am I doing? What motivated me to do this course at university? What was it that really first sparked my interest in it? So try to write those down, and then you can start to sort of embellish and add to them as you go through. I think obviously it's important you research into the course that you're going to be doing. You wouldn't want to be embarrassed and not know something about the course in terms of the way it's taught, particularly if it's a new type of course that you haven't had at A level. I say for chemistry, usually, you know, it's important to know what sort of things are done at degree level, but it largely leads on from some of the exposure you've had A-level courses and GCSE, but some other courses you may not know much about, and so you need to do some research to know what sort of things are covered. And often you can find courses can vary from university to university, so you've got to be a little careful when you're writing your personal statement that it is a universal personal statement that will cover as many of the applications you possibly can you've applied to. I don't think a particular university would be pretty pleased if you mention how much you enjoy one part of the course, knowing that they don't have that in their course. I think that would be a mistake. So just be careful as well, thinking about the courses you might be applying to and making sure the personal statement is as appropriate as it can be for all of the courses you've applied to. I think it is very good practice always in these things to produce several drafts, start writing something. Once you've got those ideas and a plan and you've done a bit of research into the course, try to put something together and get a draft and get other people to see it. Ask for feedback. I'm sure family, friends, teachers will always be very good at providing you with good feedback, particularly in your schools. You'll have lots of teachers who have experience of students going to university and filling in personal statements. They're able to give you a good insight into what would be good. I hope today's presentation is going to give you some ideas as well, but certainly do ask, don't be shy asking people for feedback. You don't have to take all of it on board. I think not everyone has the feedback that maybe is going to enhance it, but I think if you take enough views from enough people, you'll get some good feedback and be able to improve those drafts as you go through them. I think something that is often overlooked sometimes is how important it is to make sure that it looks like you've taken time and effort in producing that personal statement. I think the last thing any of us as admissions tutors want is to look through a personal statement and find it littered with spelling mistakes, punctuation errors, and that just shows a lack of attention to detail. And that would be a worry for us if this was, obviously, if you were really committed to studying at university and this is what you produce when you are committed, we'd worry about you joining our course. I think it's important. Sometimes things slip through, so don't panic over them, but do get advice and guidance and double check everything so that it does read well and it doesn't contain mistakes. I think that can be quite off-putting to an admissions tutor reading something that is littered with a number of simple errors. So in terms of don't then, I think it's important that when you write your personal statement, obviously it's your personal statement. You've got to, as I'll mention a bit later on here, I think, you don't want to copy anyone else's. And there's good reason for that. Firstly, it should be your personal statement. And UCAS have very efficient plagiarism software, and they can track if they find evidence of things that they've seen before. So please don't do that. But also, I think you are going to be looking at it, making it your personal statement. So it's something you're happy with, that gives that insight into you and how you want admissions tutors to see you. Hopefully all the positive things are pulled out, all the good things you've done over your time in recent years. And so they'll get a really positive view of you. But you don't want to start using words that you don't understand, because that can come back to haunt you. Particularly if you're in subjects where they will be using the personal statement as a basis for interviews, because that would be really quite embarrassing if you've written something you don't understand what you've written. So make sure you do understand. And I think if you've written it yourself, you probably do understand it. If somebody's suggested putting something in and you think, I don't really understand that, but I'll put it in because it sounds good, it could be an issue. So please don't do that. Try not to talk about irrelevant things. And I hope today I've given you some idea of what they might be and what relevant things are, but don't start to go off onto some tangent that really isn't relevant. Think always about, what am I trying to do in this personal statement? What are my aims? And what am I going to deliver in the end? And read through it. And so it should only contain relevant things about you, why you want to do the subject, and why you'd be a good student at that particular university. I think, people sometimes feel that, oh, I'm missing some things, I'll just make a bit up and add a bit, lying and putting things in that aren't strictly true. It's highly risky. I think it'll probably come back to haunt you. I don't think you need to. Why would you need to? You don't need to lie and put things in there. Be honest and be truthful about yourself. And of course, if you do lie and you may be questioned at interview, I've seen examples of people put things down and I've been a bit dubious about them, and I've asked them, And sometimes, yeah, it does transpire that they're quite uncomfortable, then they can't answer that particular thing when I've spoken to them. So please don't lie. You can still be truthful about everything. You can think carefully about how to best present something. You shouldn't ever need to lie, because I say it'll obviously might well find you out. Please don't rely on your spell checker. That doesn't necessarily pull out all of the potential problems. There's some rather amusing spell check errors I've noticed before in things where the word is spelt correctly but completely in the wrong place, and that can produce some rather funny results at the best of times. But you really don't want to do that and become something that's amusing in your review that you didn't in your personal you didn't want in there. So don't just rely on spell checker. Do double check everything, that it's in the right place, the right context. I think you need to plan early. Start as soon as you think you've got a good idea what we want to do at university. Don't leave it too late. Start to get the drafts together, the plans together, and then you can start to then have control over when you deliver that. You can get time for people to read through it. Anything that's rushed is likely to have mistakes in it. It's likely to not be a very good reflection of you. And so if it's worth doing well. So don't leave it too late. And I've mentioned already, please don't copy or download information because you think it sounds good. It isn't going to help you. It might well be deemed as plagiarism, and then you're in trouble with your application. But it should be your stuff. And I don't think there's any good reason why it shouldn't be that insight into you. So in summary, then, I think in terms of your construction of a personal statement, it might be, as I said to you, the only chance you have of influencing the admissions tutor with your own view of what you have to offer in that particular course. And I think that's a really important thing to put across. Sometimes personal statements are seen to be very, very important. I think for some subjects they are particularly important. For others, they are not the be all and end all, but they're a worthwhile thing to do well. And I think it can influence the admissions tutor's view of you if they read a personal statement that seems really engaging and is really from the heart, written about why you want to do that particular subject. I think research the courses that interest you. I think that's really important to have that sort of research in there as well, showing you understand what you'll be doing at degree level. I think always when you're thinking about what you're going to be doing, both at university, of course, and what you're going to put in your personal statement, so you can always discuss your choices with your teachers and with your family. They'll give you good advice. Spend your time in your personal statement and get someone else to read it as well. Each time you make a change, make sure others have had a look at it as well, so you're not adding an error into that. It should be your own words, but you can often get help in just phrasing things a little better. And I think that's a really useful way of giving you a good skill as well. Though that communication skills, the written communication skills are really important, and writing a personal statement can be really important. It's something you'll need to do in sort of different terms when you apply to jobs, when you graduate. You need to be able to talk about yourself in a positive way. So those skills can be really important as well. Make sure it's the truth. I said to you, you don't want to put in things that you think might be eye-catching. You may well be caught out with them. I would avoid them because the consequences can be quite major. Spelling and punctuation do matter. Do make sure that you remove any errors from there, so that as I said to you, it's more about the admissions tutor thinking that you haven't spent time and effort on it. So why should we read it if you've not really spent that time on it? So make sure you do. And I think one thing as well is when you look at it and read it about yourself is, would you offer yourself a place? And I hope you would afterwards, after reading it and seeing all the positive things you can put in there. So just think carefully, take your time over it. But don't worry overly about it. It's not the be all and end all. I wouldn't want you having sleepless nights thinking about the personal statement. But I think you can do a really good job of it with support of your teachers and your family and your friends. You can write a really good summary of why you want to do that course and why you'd be really good at that course. And I think if you can convince yourself, then you're halfway there to convincing the admissions tutors as well. So related to that, then, I did promise I'd mention very briefly a little bit about interviews. And I guess this is difficult to give a really definitive view on interviews because they can take different forms, particularly now in this day and age where we're dealing, as we are tonight, over Zoom. I'm delighted that we're starting to get some in-person teaching. We have been over the last few months as well. And in our admissions process, we're looking at in-person visits as well. So be prepared. There are different forms and different formats to interviews. I think if you're dealing, and this is certainly for the chemistry course, and it would be the same in medicine and others, what are your motivations for doing the subject? Be prepared to be asked about that, and also maybe asked a bit about the subject. Certainly in chemistry, we'd expect you to be asked a little bit about the chemistry. And this is where, if you've highlighted in your personal statement something that you really enjoy about, say, chemistry, a particular reaction or a particular type of chemistry that really interests you, now be prepared that you might well be asked on that. It's an obvious, simple way in that any of us academics will look at and go, oh, they've mentioned this, oh, I'm going to ask them a bit about that then. So you can see, just be prepared that what you've written in your personal statement may be used to initiate a discussion. And that's certainly something you can do a bit of prep for. Otherwise, it's very difficult to prepare the subject content for an interview. What could you be asked? Because really could be asked anything. I think the areas that might come up in, and often do come up in interviews, is what's your favorite topic amongst the subjects you're doing now? What are you doing at the moment, studying at the moment? And be prepared that you'd be asked those. And therefore, from that, be prepared to answer some questions, have a bit of maybe revising on those areas, your favorite topic, or the thing you're doing at the moment, or maybe not the moment. You possibly can be a little bit untruthful there and pick something you've done more recently rather than at the very moment, if that's something you prefer. And so you're setting the context for the interview, which I think is a really important thing. If you can keep the interviewer talking about things that you want to talk about and showing off the things that you've prepared, then the better for you, rather than them picking out something that they may have pre-prepared. And of course, you wouldn't have any insight into that. So there is always that opportunity for a pre-prepared question from the interviewer, and you just have to hope that you've thought and think carefully about these questions, because it's very difficult to learn all the content that you would be asked about, and it can be very difficult to prepare for. But what I would say to you is, please don't panic if you do get asked some sort of pre-prepared question or another question that throws you momentarily. Now, often the interviewer is not looking for a complete answer to that question. What they're looking for is how you tackle that question. How do you think about an approach? And it may be you don't really know what the answer is, but you can talk through with the interviewer how you would find out what sort of things might be important in answering that question. I think using that sort of logic is really what interviewer wants to see. It's not someone who becomes flummoxed and really panics. Try to control your anxiety at that stage. Try to keep it in check, but just think logically about what might happen, what might be needed for this answer. And if you talk it through, you'll often find the interviewer is not going to be just sitting there in silence. They'll be willing to help you if you're showing something. Now, is it this area? Is it related to this part? I wonder, I might be just knowing about this. And you can explain to the interviewer then quite how you're going to go about answering that question. So, as I said to you, they're really looking for more about how you logically tackle a question. Even if you don't know the answer, I think that can be a very successful interview, just talking through what might be important about a question, because we know as academics that A-levels do vary, and particularly in this current time when you've had such disrupted teaching over the last year or so, it isn't so much about knowing all of your content, it's just being able to apply a bit of simple logic to how you might tackle that problem. So I hope that gives you an insight into things. Now, I said in terms of research, I mean, this is something, if you're looking at your subject, and this is obviously if you're applying, say, to chemistry at Birmingham, I'd be thinking you need to be looking at a bit about the subject, particularly if you're going on an interview and you're going to visit a place and talk to an academic. You need to know a little bit about what goes on. So in terms of Birmingham, I'd expect people applying to us would know a little bit about where we are, our campus, a little bit about the sort of research that we do in our department. I think having a knowledge of that, doing your homework around, now we cover lots of research in areas like drug discovery. We're developing new materials for sustainability, sort of plastics and polymers that we can make them more environmentally friendly, or looking at new energy technologies, making new batteries. So knowing those sort of areas that we studied would be really useful if you are doing a bit of research on studying chemistry at Birmingham. I think also knowing a bit about the facilities, a bit about the way we teach as well, I think would be really important. I know that's quite difficult in the current climate because we've had to change a lot of the way we teach. But I think if you do have a look and try to get an insight into a department, it gives you a real good sense. I think the academics would like to hear that you know about what you've done a bit of research about it. Oh, I know about that. I've heard about this. Tell me a bit about that. And even in an interview, it's quite interesting. If you've got a good question where you've done a bit of research about particularly one of the departmental strong points in a certain area, you can then ask in that. And I say in an interview, you can ask questions of the interviewer that are good questions. It's less time you answering questions, and it'd be quite impressive if you've shown you've given some thought to why the department has certain features, certain research interests, and be able to bring those to the interview, and then spend less time you answering questions and get the academic to work instead. So those sort of things I think are really important in understanding your subject. I think as well, you need to look at all the courses that have an offer. I think the research that you do when you're thinking about university is really important. At the moment, obviously, much of it has to be online. I think if it's like us, we've got some open days coming up in July at the University of Birmingham. So if you're interested in coming to Birmingham for any courses, or particularly in chemistry, I'd love to welcome you to the School of Chemistry. But we will be open on campus with real opportunities for you to meet with staff and students and tour our facilities. So do look out to see what other universities are doing. I don't think many are offering at the moment, so I think we're early. So in the first week in July, we'll have our campus open. So do take those opportunities to go and speak and see places, talk to academics, talk to students particularly, and find out what course they're doing. So in Birmingham Chemistry, we have a range of courses from chemistry, straight chemistry, where you're doing a master's 4-year or a 3-year BSc, but also we can link our subject into industrial experience. So if you know about that, you can ask the academics, where would you have industrial placements? Where could you go to? Which companies could you work for? Is it only in the UK, or can you study, can you have placements outside the UK? And those sort of things. And if you've got an idea of where you want to work, you can mention those companies as well. And I think the other thing is, if you've got an interest in things like study abroad, you can talk about how you might want to spend a year of your studies out in another university around the world. So that's something in common with lots of courses, not only chemistry at Birmingham, but other courses have those options for study abroad, and they give you a great chance to sample, the types of cultures, both in Europe and outside as well. So you can also mix courses. I think sometimes you might find a combination that really suits you. We certainly have mixed things like chemistry with business, and that's a reasonably popular course there as well. So you can see, you might find other courses that are joined and have joint honours or major minors. This particular program is as well. So doing your research is really useful because it helps you in your application, but also will allow you to talk with some confidence when you meet with the academics in the relevant schools. Also, obviously, carefully look as well at the entry requirements. You need to make sure that whatever course you're applying to is one that is a sensible one. I think your teachers will give you good advice and guidance on this as well, because they'll have a pretty good sense of what you can achieve. So it depends on what sort of A levels you're able to get. Often it depends on what subjects you're doing. Now, some subjects have defined requirements. So for chemistry, it's only A level chemistry that we require. But if you want to do engineering, you've got to have the maths. If you want chemical engineering, it's chemistry and maths. And for some other subjects, obviously you have specific A-level courses you must do for those to get onto those degree programs. So make sure you research that carefully. It'd be rather a mistake if you sort of apply to a course that you couldn't actually get onto because you didn't have the right qualifications. Also look at the level of the qualifications. I think it goes without doubt that you should be thinking sensibly. I think you should aim high. You should be ambitious. With your teacher's help, be guided by what you should do, but maybe have a range of places you apply to. If you are not sure about whether you can achieve the entry requirements of one place, have some insurance places lined up as well, so you'd be confident that amongst the different places you've applied to, you'll get some good offers that you're able to achieve some of them, and aim high for others as well. So that's really important as well. And we've got to mention here that we have, some of our courses are interlinked. Like we have an offer guarantee where if you apply to the master's program, but then you fail to get that by one grade, then you're automatically accepted onto the BSc. So there's no harm in aiming for the higher course if you know there's an inbuilt safety net in some of these disciplines, and that's quite common in many subjects. So in terms of our entry process, and it's not the same for every university or every department either, I think we are very keen to look at every individual application and treat it on an individual basis. This is why I read all the personal statements, and that's really important to me to get some insight into somebody applying to study chemistry at Birmingham. Often universities will invite you to come and visit them, and obviously over the last year this has been quite difficult. It's been done in a virtual way, but hopefully over the next few months that will start to open up. In fact, Birmingham is committed to having, at the moment, having a fully open campus with no COVID restrictions come September. So that's the plan we're delivering at the moment, and we're planning towards. Obviously, we hope that's the case, but it will also enable us to have more open processes for our applications as well, because the students that are currently going to be joining us in September, up until, I say, last weekend, they haven't been able to visit us at all in the last year. So please do, if you get a chance to, take that opportunity. There's nothing better than going to visit a place, getting a sense of that place. It's something you can't pick up from websites or Zoom calls or necessarily talking to people. Going onto a campus and visiting that place is really very insightful. And I would say, please do make every effort to do it if you get a chance to. I think for us as well, when we're looking at the offers that we make and the decisions we make, we look at your A-level subjects. So we look at how well you're performing. We look at the course, obviously, you've applied for and what relevance that might be to those A-level subjects. But we also look at the overall UCAS application. So it's not just the personal statement, it's the school report, and it's also your previous qualifications that can be a really good guide to how you might be doing come this time next year. And I think that's probably where I'm going to leave it. I hope in that sort of half hour or so, I've given you a reasonable insight into my thinking behind personal statements. I think it's probably in common with most of my colleague and fellow admissions tutors, but I hope it's given you an insight, and I'm more than happy now to try and answer any questions that you may have about studying at university and applying to university.
Well, thank you very much, Adrian, for that excellent advice, and hopefully it's sort of demystified the process for some of you.
I hope so. I hope so. It can be a bit scary to think about applying to university when you haven't actually, particularly if none of your family have ever been to university before. You know, you've got no older brothers or sisters. It can be a bit daunting, but please, you know, it's something that many thousands of students do each year, and certainly as much as we're here to help and guide you, and so are the teachers. They're an invaluable source of support and guidance.
Listen, well, we had a question straight off the bat here, Adrian.
Okay.
About joint honours.
Yeah.
Here saying, I'm thinking of doing a joint honours in chemistry and maths because I really like maths as well as chemistry. But I'm worried that doing chemistry with maths will mean that I will not be able to do as much of the interesting chemistry. Do you have any advice, or do you know if doing a joint honours will mean that I do less, or I can't go?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think I can understand many students thinking about a dilemma. I've got to choose between two subjects I really love. You know, I love the chemistry and I love the maths as well. So why might I want to, you know, how can I combine those? I think you've got to think carefully. That's a really good question. I think I can't tell you what the right answer is, but I can certainly say that if you look at doing chemistry at degree level, as Mark will testify, you know, the subject can be very mathematical if you wish it to be. And I think that's something where you can do some really fascinating areas of chemistry whilst developing and using your mathematics skills. There aren't many chemistry with maths courses around the country. It's quite a specialist course. There are some available. I think if you enjoy the chemistry side of things, it's the maths at degree level, I guess, doesn't really have much of the application in how we might think about an application. I mean, the mathematics can be, you know, it can be the love of numbers that you're dealing with in mathematics. I think if you're looking at the way that they're applied, obviously engineering is a possibility as well. That's a very mathematical base to those subjects. But I would suggest have a detailed look at some of the chemistry courses. My advice probably would be to stick with a straight chemistry course. And I know that might be biased because I am a chemistry member of staff. But I think many of our students who really love the maths can get their joy of maths still while studying a degree level chemistry program. I don't know whether, Mark, you've got any comments as well, because I know you obviously, from your computational background in chemistry, you've got some good insight as well.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, not just physical chemistry, but also computational chemistry, modeling. Yeah, you use the maths. You use that to investigate reactions, and the modeling and computing as well. So you're using quite a few aspects of it, and that really stretches the maths. And of course, as you go further on in the degree course, you choose different options. You can do projects as well. So if you really have an interest in maths, you could do, for example, a modeling project in the final year to really sort of focus on that area. So yeah, there's plenty of scope for doing maths and also interesting computational studies as well.
Absolutely, I think Yeah, very much so. So I think have an investigation, go around, have a look at some of the courses. I think, some courses require A-level maths, some don't. That doesn't mean at Birmingham, we don't require A-level maths, and that's a conscious choice that we looked at our course, and there isn't a necessity to have A-level maths. We need strong GCSE maths, but there isn't a necessity for A-level maths. But we do teach in the first year, we teach the maths to all of our students. And it shows you that even the A-level maths, there are bits that we want to add to that are really relevant to the chemistry. And sort of as well linking into how we deal with numbers and data analysis and computer programs, to say the mathematical parts of that can really become a really important part of your degree, and maybe one you spend your entire final year research project doing as well, where you're not in a lab as such. Your lab is your computer and your maths that you're dealing with on that.
Absolutely. So no, thank you for that. So it is interesting, and there's plenty of scope as well. So you agree that actually so many aspects of. So
I'm afraid I didn't give you a definitive answer of yes or no. I think probably my judgment would be to do if you really love your chemistry, then I think you can find opportunities to do the maths whilst doing the chemistry, and you can tailor those particularly.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good question here. It's really about the length of the personal statement. So I was asking, how many paragraphs should your personal statement be?
Yeah, I mean, it's useful to break them. I mean, you've got a word limit. I think a character limit probably in the personal statement. But I think you don't want it too many paragraphs to be broken up, so that it becomes a little bit bitty to read. But equally, just one single paragraph isn't really sensible either. I think you probably don't need many paragraphs. You maybe need 3, and it could be where you break them down into sort of the different things you're trying to do. Initially, why you want to do the course and your skills on that. The other things that you do in academic, in other studies that link to that. Then a final paragraph maybe on those sort of pastimes and interests that you have that then lead to those generic and those transferable skills. So I'd probably look about 3 or so, but probably more than that. You need to justify why they're a separate paragraph.
And a quick one about entry requirements, actually, interesting one. So it said that if the entry requirements for a course are, say, for example, A star, change if you're doing 4 A levels? That's
a very good question. I think sometimes there is that some universities will give a statement for 4 A levels. It's quite rare, but often the majority are down to 3. So at Birmingham, we recognise if somebody was applying with 4 A levels, we would still make a typical offer based on 3 A levels, but we would only require that chemistry was one of those ones. So you could, in theory, you're not going to be, your 4th A level isn't going to be ignored as such, but it gives you more scope to meet the entry requirements. So say if that offer was A star, it may not specifically say which of those A levels it should contain, apart from, say, for us, it would be the chemistry we'd have to have as one of those 3. But it gives you some scope then to meet that with different subjects. I think as well, for things like we have scholarships, and so we would take into account a 4th A level then as an important contribution. But most universities will make offers based on 3, but not all. Some will tailor the offer to the 4 A levels you're doing.
Excellent, thank you. Good question about extenuating circumstances here. Yes. So someone said that if they do have extenuating circumstances, will there be support for applications regarding predicted grades, so long as we are determined to achieve the offer requirements? Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think when you think about people that, it's been a challenging last year or so. So there are reasons why students haven't been able to quite get to the level that they would have liked to have done. I think this is where we rely as a university so much on the teachers' insight. The teachers know the students well. They've obviously often been very experienced in sending lots of students to university. So we rely on them to recognize when they making predictions about what's sensible and appropriate for those particular students, because we can't second guess really. So we don't really know the student that well. We've only got the application form to start with. That's our only insight that we have, and we read the grades there. What is always very useful is to read the school reference there to understand why those grades are predicted, because sometimes we see predictions that don't match with what's previously happened for that student,
And if we can see a very good reason given in the school statement to support that, then we're fine to accept that. But sometimes we'll question things if there's suddenly the grades appear a lot higher than the students previously achieved. But if there's a good reason for that, maybe the student's been ill, or they've had changed schools, or they've suddenly realized that this is what they want to do and they've really started to be motivated, then we really need to hear that insight. So I'm afraid we can't often take them into consideration in terms of their grades. We'll have to take the grades as they're issued by the exam board. And obviously, if the school believes that somebody maybe hasn't got the grades they wanted, they can often, make sure those circumstances are made clear to the examination board. Now, this year is an unusual year, and the schools themselves are making those judgments. So it's much easier, hopefully, to get that integrated into whatever grades are being issued but to the students. So we get a good idea then that they've had the best grades that reflect their abilities. Now, once you come to university, I guess, I don't know whether the question was really meaning that as well. You will, if you've had support at school for various things to aid your learning, you'll continue to have those at university. We'll help support every student with sort of learning agreements to make sure that if they do have dyslexia or any other issue that might be affecting the way they study, then we'll support that as well. But in terms of actual A-level grades, we rely on the teachers helping, and then the exam board giving the right grade for that to make sure that we get the students that deserve to come to university coming to us.
Excellent, thank you. A question here about the kind of leadership evidence.
Yeah.
An interesting example where someone created a medical society in their school where they were able to inspire and support year 11s to apply for medicine. They gained leadership skills. So would this be a good extracurricular activity?
Absolutely brilliant. That's the sort of thing, you can think about that, going out, the motivation and the ability to do that, the perseverance often to set things up, they're not often easy to do. So you need to organize lots of people to get them to be in place, and then the support. So you've got, it's a win-win on many counts. That's a really great thing. If you've done that and helped others and set something that hadn't been there before, you've recognized where there's a need for something, you've gone out of your way, you've done that, because these things would need the coordination and help of teachers and others to get done. If you've led that and driven that, that's a great example of leadership.
Excellent. No, that's great. So yeah, definitely include that. There's an interesting question now that I think it's quite popular and quite a few people ask. So dispel some myths for us, please.
I'll try.
How similar to chemistry is chemical engineering?
Right. That's a question I know Mark and I have been asked many times. It's often one that is, I guess, I know chemical engineering. I've worked with lots of chemical engineers, and it is a different subject. And I think sometimes at A-level, you've not done chemical engineering, so you don't really have a sense of what that entails. So I said to you, chemistry is a lot like what you've done at A-level. You're doing the understanding of molecules and materials, how they relate to properties, through the physical chemistry, inorganic and organic chemistry that you've done already at A-level. And it's very applied. Sort of things that we do in our course link into making new, pharmaceuticals, new drugs, making new materials for energy applications, whether that be in developing new nuclear storage compounds and materials, or whether it be in producing, recyclable plastics, biodegradable plastics. There's lots in there, so it's quite applied. Now, some people think that chemistry applied is called chemical engineering. It isn't. So chemical engineering is engineering. So the thing about chemical engineering, so I think I always use this anecdote, and probably Mark's heard it many times. Actually, my brother-in-law is a chemical engineer, and I think my anecdote really is something that I think explains how the two are related. Now, chemical engineers and chemists have to work together in most employment, so they're always pitched together solving particular problems. So my brother-in-law always say to me, there you are as a chemist, you'll produce this maybe 0.5 gram of this material, maybe a fantastic new potential drug. You've got 0.5 gram of it. How on earth can you save the world with 0.5 gram of that sample? And he's absolutely right. There is no way that we can make a contribution to things, making that 0.5 gram at a time. We'd be there forever doing it. So the chemical engineer's role is to take whatever the chemist has maybe identified or has produced, and to make it into a process that's mass produced, that then is available for the. So the same thing we can think about in producing, global vaccines, or whether it be producing lithium batteries. for our vehicles or for our mobile devices. We need to mass produce those and produce them on a large scale. And that's what chemical engineers do. They look at the maths, they model these chemical reactions, and they look at how the process and flow control is done. So it's very, very engineering based. But I would say in response to my brother-in-law is, without that little bit of inspiration at the start, the chemical engineers have nothing to do. So we have to work with each other. We may be the ones that find that new material, but we have to find a way of producing it in a large scale if it's going to make any significant difference. So that's the way I'd look at it. It's not really applied chemistry, chemical engineering. It's a whole different subject. It is more engineering than it is chemistry. And I think the thing to do about chemical engineers is go and talk to chemical engineers, look on websites. That's how I differentiate the two. I don't know if Mark, you've had anything to add to that.
No, and if you're doing anything with engineering the title, you've got to be really good at maths, and
that's right,
prepared to do a lot of maths during the degree as well. Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. No, thank you for that. That is quite a common one. I think
we've had many times, and I think some people do take on courses, they don't really realize what they are until they've started. It's a little bit too late. So as I said to you in the personal statement, but I mentioned, research what you want to do. Make sure it's the right thing for you. Don't go on what you maybe a preconceived idea about what the subject is. Find out what it is. It might have changed recently, and so that's worth exploring.
Absolutely. Quickly back to personal statements now, and a question saying, is it better to give examples of many skills briefly, or concentrate on a few good skills but in more detail?
I think I think you've got to be careful not to make a list. I can do this, and this. It's a bit, okay, it's got some impression, but I think what's better is to try and focus on what you think are the most important ones. And you've got a good story around them and a good reason why you think you have those skills. So I would err on the side of fewer rather than many, and being able to explain those few with some really good and sort of eye-catching examples if you can, or some good backup to why you think you've got that skill. I think that's what I'd do.
Yeah, absolutely. And for someone lacking in work experience, would you say that it might put them at a disadvantage?
I don't think so. I think sometimes a big deal is made out of work experience, and particularly in the last year, it's been so difficult to get any work experience. I think everyone understands that is not necessarily something that every student can have. So I wouldn't worry about it. I'm sure there's plenty more of other things you can put into your personal statement than having the work experience. I think it's rare you'll have a really key work experience that you can put in there that really will be worth losing other things for. So I think I wouldn't worry about it. You've probably got other things you can put in, and it's not a be all and end all to have work experience, particularly in this current climate.
Absolutely. I think we're very, very, very understanding of that. Yeah. And in similar way to the chemical engineering, could you give any advice on choosing between chemistry and natural sciences?
Very good question. That's a really tough one. I think that is it has some of the similarities of the chemistry and maths option that was mentioned earlier. I think natural sciences, so for some universities there isn't really chemistry, you do natural sciences, and that's where you do a combination of subjects at quite a high level, and then you begin to specialize as you go through. But many other universities, like Birmingham as well, has a liberal arts and natural sciences program where you can start to do little bits of courses. So you can do a module or two in chemistry and a module in maths, or a module. In fact, at Birmingham Liberal Arts, you can do a module in something completely different outside the area of sciences as well. I think it's a judgment call you need to make for yourself, really, as to what you think your interests, where they really lie. I think as a chemistry degree, you have so much scope to really touch upon other subjects. I always think, that chemistry is quite a central science. I think everyone agrees that it is, really, even those not in chemistry, that it provides us with a language to explain things through molecules and materials, through bonding and through atoms, that isn't necessarily the same with physics, and isn't necessarily the same when you're dealing with large systems like biology and material science. We have, I think, and I've always been captivated by how you can explain things at that atomic level in the way chemistry deals with things. So I think you've got to think about whether a chemistry degree will allow you to do the things that you enjoy doing? Would it allow you to move your sort of chemistry studies towards maybe the more biological side of chemistry, or maybe towards the more mathematical engineering side, more physics side of chemistry? We have such strong overlaps in lots of things. I think chemistry is really, really good. If you're interested in doing one subject, then I think chemistry might be the one for you. But certainly in some courses, there's great reputations in natural sciences. So do look at them. The only thing you've got to remember as well is it's going to be quite a challenge doing the natural sciences, because you're doing one module done by all the chemists in one department, and they're going to do another module by all the mathematicians in other departments, and so on. And sometimes some of the courses aren't that well integrated, and it can be more of a challenge to you to do that. But I've known some really good students doing natural sciences at Birmingham as well as doing chemistry. I'm afraid it's probably an answer I can't give you as to what's right. Again, investigate, again, talk to people and get some sense of it. But I do want to emphasize, I think chemistry is quite a broad thing that you can really within it specialize towards your own interests during the course.
That's wonderful. Yeah, thank you. In the interest of time, just a couple of quick questions. Just in terms of different degree and course types, could you explain briefly what's the difference between our MSci and BSc courses?
Very good. I think you'll see, if you look at chemistry courses around the country, you'll see that often they have called MChem sometimes in the chemistry courses, and they're the same as MSci. So the difference really is in terms of the number of years you study. So usually the bachelor's courses are 3 years of study, and the master's courses, undergraduate master's courses, are 4 years. So effectively, you're doing the BSc plus an extra year to get a master's degree. And that's become quite common along many of the science subjects and engineering. So at Birmingham, we have BEng and MEng courses for engineering, which are the same as that. They're undergraduate master's courses. So they integrate a year of master's into it. Now, you might think, I'm not sure I want to commit to 4 years, but you'll find that many of the programs, once you apply to one of them, you can swap between them. And certainly at Birmingham, for the Masters and the BSc, you don't have to decide until the end of year 2 whether you do 1 more year and have a BSc or 2 more years with a Masters. So I think don't worry too much about it. Often the intro requirements are a bit higher, but you see in Birmingham, we have an offer guarantee. So they're really the same sort of offer. Don't worry about being committed. Often you'll get a chance to change between them during your degree.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Adrian. And thank you very much for answering those questions. And
no, my pleasure. It was great to have so many good questions. I hope everyone's found that useful. It's been a delight to be able to speak to you this evening and to answer those questions. And please, do explore, if you're thinking about going to university, particularly going to chemistry university. Obviously, I'd say that's the one to do, isn't it? Because I'm a admissions tutor in chemistry. Wherever you go in the country, go and do chemistry. It's a great subject to do at university and degree level. But do try and find out over the summer. It's beginning to open up now. You're beginning to get some opportunities to go and visit places. You'll see my backdrop here. I'm afraid this is a Zoom background, but it is a central campus. And going to visit places gives you a real good sense of really, if that's a place you'd want to spend 3 or 4 years of your life. So my advice is start to explore those open days. They're really worthwhile.
Absolutely. And have a look at the Department of Chemistry webpage as well. They give dates and also
absolutely.
There are email or way to contact the admissions team as well for any of the questions you may have.
Absolutely. Don't hesitate. If you've got a question, drop us an email. We've got a team that can give you an answer, hopefully quite quickly, and answer any questions you may have.
Excellent. Well, no, thank you very much once again, Adrian, for that. That's really
my pleasure.
The two things I would add, just echo really. The first important thing is, yes, do visit the campus. This is where you're going to spend 3 or 4 years of your life. It's got to have that kind of good feel about it. So do visit, do talk to existing students. There's plenty of opportunity to ask them about the course, about the accommodation, the lecture style, etc. So do make the most of those open days. And then finally, on these personal statements, the one bit of advice I really would echo is, whatever you write, just remember what you've written, because when you're sitting in front of the interviewer and they do ask questions, it's natural to ask about topics you've written down. Just remember, just make a copy and remember what you've written so you can ask questions on it. That it sounds straightforward, but you'd be surprised.
Isn't that right, Mark? We've often seen examples where people have forgotten what they've written, and it's you just want to. You don't have to memorize every word of it, but remember what you've written would be useful. The main thrust of what you've written.
Excellent. Great. Well, there's some messages. I don't know if you can see the chat, Adrian, but there's quite a few messages come up. Thank you very much.
Oh, good.
I'm trying to say very helpful. Yeah, thank you for the information. So yeah, so very.
I'm delighted to be of help. It's been a real pleasure to talk to everyone. Apologies, we took a bit longer to get this than a couple of weeks ago, but I hope those that have been willing to wait, it's been worthwhile. It's certainly been great to speak to you all this evening.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thank you all very much once again, and thank you to the WMCTC committee, Ross.
Absolutely, thank them very much for inviting me.
And University of Birmingham. So thank you all very much, and all the very best for those applications and that difficult choice of choosing your degree in university.
Absolutely. Look forward to reading them in the future. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you.